Доброго дня, шановні гості.
Good afternoon, dear guests, dear presenters, our guests in the press room, and those who watch us on stream. The UCMC continues its conference today, and currently we're having the briefing devoted to the reintegration of veterans survey. Dear colleagues, thank you for this opportunity. I'm Mariia Berlinska. I represent the program on the veterans reintegration supported by IREX. And today we are going to present our survey, which we carried out jointly with the KIS with the Veterans Hub and some other NGOs. The Veterans Reintegration Program, to which the survey is a part, covers actually a big spectrum of objectives and tasks. And one of those tasks is to provide assistance to the institutions and capacity building, in particular to the Ministry of Veterans Affairs, in establishing the register of the war veterans in Ukraine. And I'm happy to see many familiar faces in this room. Thank you for coming, for attending this press conference, and I would like to thank to all our spectators who watch us on stream. At the end, we will open Q&A sessions, so you will be able to ask questions both offline here in the room and online. There's a survey just as the whole program of the veterans reintegration support became possible due to the support of the U.S. Department of State and U.S. People in general. And now I will give the floor to my colleague who will present the survey in its right. Our survey had the main objective to fill in the critical gaps in information about the situation with the war veterans in Ukraine. Here, I need to explain what we mean under the term war veterans in our survey. We focused our attention on the veterans of ATO and joint forces operations, those who were part of the military armed forces of Ukraine, National Guard of Ukraine, volunteer battalions, and State Border Service, and those who were involved in the armed conflict in the east of Ukraine, starting with 2014 and up to the performance of the survey. So that the survey covered and the questionnaires covered the veterans and the general population of Ukraine. Our objective was to understand the current needs of the veterans in different areas, in their military experience, the situation with the healthcare, the health needs, welfare needs, and then we would like to compare that indicators with the similar indicators of the population in general, and that allowed us to produce assumptions what is needed for better reintegration of the veterans. As for the methodology, about the procedure of the survey. It was a structured interview and 12 discussions in focus groups. The time frames were as follows. Early March 2014, this was the beginning of the survey, and then the field work was launched in March. And we planned first to carry out the survey via personalized interviews, but later we had to adjust it due to the COVID restrictions to the telephone interviews. The sample itself was formed as a random sample. The KIIS formed a sample out of the mobile telephone numbers. Our survey also included people aged 18 and more years of age, and this was about general population sample. As for the veterans sample, it was formed by the method of a snowball, selecting the respondents. We used the contact details which we received from our partner veteran organizations like Veteran Hub, the League, the Lawyers 100, and some others. And when we started to contact the first respondents and requested for the contacts of the veteran mates and followers, and but they were not very responsive, and we had to go back to the partner veteran organizations to find more veterans. That's why the sample of the veterans is not as random as we wanted to make it. That is, the major number of our veterans who were surveyed, they are somehow related to the social organizations of the veterans. As for the gender split, 4% were women veterans or female veterans, and 96% were male veterans. As for the age groups, the groups which were questioned were the group up to 49 years of age, among the veterans up to 37 years of age, among the population. And what we found out that the veterans were much better educated than the average population. Almost 40% of the veterans had of higher education. while in general population sample it was lower. And then further on we will look at the other indicators. Thank you, Yana. I'm Ivona Kostyna. I'm leader of the Veteran Hub NGO. For us, it was a big honor to participate in this survey. And this is our 4th year of the field work with veterans, and we clearly understand that in current situation in the East, we have more than 220,000 war veterans, and we do not know much enough about them. And in course of survey, we faced a lot of individual and stories, very personal stories. We can imagine in general how do the veterans live, but we cannot imagine this at the level of specific personality. That's why we, if we wish to formulate policy decisions which are efficient, which are well designed, we have to understand the needs at more personal level. We believe this is a proper time to do this. Of course, it may be a bit more boring than to speak to people, but now we have to make a next step to analyze the survey results and to produce good recommendations based on it. 76% of veterans were combatants. That is, they had at least one case of combat experience, even if they served not in combat positions, which actually meant that 70% of them were in this or that way injured. Almost 70% started their service in the military forces by 2015. This is perhaps not very representative survey. And some certain percentage of them had previous military or combat experience. Many of them were actually volunteers. This does not mean that they were enrolled to the service as volunteers, but this means that they voluntarily became enrolled into the military services even when they received summons. And as I mentioned, 9 of 10 served either in combat positions or had experience with combating. And actually, as I already mentioned, more than 70% has the needs in healthcare services, and not all of them are registered as people with disabilities. And a big share of them believes that they feel the impact of that injuries or health effects, health conditions in everyday life. 57% received the different degree crane injuries, and not all of those crane injuries were registered, and many percent of them, 38%, qualify themselves as a persons with a disability. And actually, there are quite many obstacles for a person who wishes to be registered as a person with a disability by the state, at the state level. Nevertheless, at least 72% requested for the healthcare services. All the rest believed that they had no such need. And 37% out of those who applied for the healthcare service, they felt discontent. They were not happy with the level of services, and partially this is due to the improper understanding of the needs of veterans by the medical workers. Veterans go to state healthcare services more often than general population, and planning for the delivery of state healthcare services, we should keep in mind that 97% of veterans would request for the state healthcare services, and this should be included into the state planning of these services, because only 3% of them applied for the private medical services, and a huge percentage of them believe that they need psychological support, 37% of them, and 78 believes that they do not need this psychological support. This is another big challenge for us, how to build up good reputation for psychological support, to establish it as a not only reputable service, but as a method that could help to people in need. Here is a huge potential for the peer support and peer building awareness, peer-to-peer awareness building. Out of discussions from the discussions in the focus groups, we have learned that the veterans are not happy with psychological support from psychologists who provide this assistance. But I have to comment that we did not study the psychological support side of this extreme, but this reflects the attitude of the veterans. What is also important, these are health indicators of the veterans, which distinguish them from general population. They have problems with sleeping, or excessive need in sleeping. Then another indicator is a bad mood, sense of distress, or the lack of hope, hopelessness. Um, Perhaps we should think how to organize training for the medical experts in these specific issues. And now closer to the recommendations. We work for the audience, which quite often is unable to identify that the negative symptoms are closely related to the past combat actions, military actions, and the proper work with the consequences might improve their lives. Thus, we have to encourage the veterans to seek for the psychological support, but that psychological support should be reorganized and more targeted to the specific needs. To develop the potential of medical workers aimed at discovering and treatment of injuries, body injuries and psychological injuries. It is very important to encourage those medical workers to develop more their capacity to help the veterans, because the experience proves that the veterans go to those medical experts who are closer to them, and we have to develop potential, to develop capacity of such medical staff. And what is important, we have to develop the collection of reliable data about those veterans who are at the moment of leaving their military service, in order to be able to trace back the changes, to find out when the situation with their healthcare worsens, and to offer medical support at the right moment. So I encourage you to look at those figures. They are very useful. They provide a lot of food for your thought. Thank you, dear colleagues. I'm Viktoriia Klymchuk-Dluhach. I'm a program officer of IREX Veteran Reintegration Program, and I would share several thoughts with you. It is important to understand that behind all those figures from our survey, there are real human lives, and the human lives of those people who lived in the neighborhoods. And when you think that those figures look boring, you should see the real people behind them. That's why for us in our Veterans Reintegration Program, it's very important to make our activities more target-oriented to specific live people. As of the moment of our service, 72% of veterans were employed, and we can clearly see the jobs where they are employed. The biggest share of them go in for the military service. A big percentage also go to the security and law enforcement services, construction and repairs, production, industries, transport and services. What are the least areas which the areas where the veterans almost cannot find job? There's IT, computers, and internet. 23% of veterans lost their jobs after military service, and 42% out of them change their job after military service, and this is a huge percentage which creates additional challenges. 59% of the veterans answered that they had problems with employment, and 32% perceived that the employers were not very eager to employ them with their status of veterans. Before the military service, 24% of veterans were happy with their jobs, and after the military service, only 16% are happy with their jobs. The biggest support in search for the job for the veterans is the assistance of their friends. This once again suggests that the level of trust among the veterans to their fellow mates is very high. This is important. This proves that they take seriously the opinion of their former military mates. What are our recommendations? First of all, to develop the list of services in career development which would comply with the market needs requirements, and here we should take into account the experience of veteran organizations in Ukraine. It is important to provide a priority to the veterans with disabilities. And the government should provide tax and financial privileges to the employers, to the employers who would hire the veterans and would counteract discrimination. And we should promote more the positive image of war veterans in society to make it more veteran friendly. 87% of veterans made use of the state services which are rendered by the state, subsidies to cover the household services, utility services, transport transport cost compensations, and some other. 70% mentioned that application for these privileges is a cumbersome process, and 46% mentioned that the information about available privileges is very scarce and you cannot find it easily. This is a quotation from one of the veterans about his personal experience in application to the services. He was irritated. He was bored and tired. He was disappointed with the bureaucracy, with corruption, and at each step he had to prove that he was a real war veteran. This is a big chart with small letters and small figures. This is the level of satisfaction among veterans with privileged services. They are the most happy with the 2 additional weeks of vacations. Then assistance in drug abuse, attendance of vocational training. These are all the areas about which they are most satisfied. The least happy they are about loans for construction, assistance in employment, and subsidies on the utility services. Our recommendations in this area are as follows. The state system of veterans registration should be improved, specifically in one unified register. Then we should overcome the gap between real needs of the veterans and the list of services which is offered to them currently. And to introduce commercial incentives for employers like tax vacations, which might stimulate employers to offer jobs to veterans. The rest of our report is even more interesting, and Mariia will describe where to find it. I'm in that 93% of veterans who are happy about 2 additional weeks of holidays. I will describe the situation with the female veterans. This was a separate focus in our survey. As you can see, 11% of female veterans got the status of the person with disabilities against 20% of male veterans. Also, we have a split between the veterans with combat experience and 787 days. This is average service period of female veterans. And when it comes to split between combat and non-combat positions between male and female veterans, the split is 48 to 79 percent. And women more often apply for the psychological support, and this data should be taken into consideration when drafting the psychological support programs. Also, this slide describes, please do not take this as gender discrimination, that 53% of female veterans have higher education against 37% of higher educated male veterans. Discrimination, gender-based discrimination. 66% of female veterans mentioned gender-based discrimination. And then different percentages mentioned the conflict with personal life, then claims in prostitution, and the condemnations for the service in military service. And when we compare male and female veterans, we clearly see that women are more discriminated as veterans against male veterans. The next slide shows our recommendations. What our program may offer for better reintegration of female veterans. We believe that here the approach should be comprehensive. It is important to support the grassroots female veteran organizations and support partnerships of such organizations, and to oppose stereotypes in this area, the stereotypes about female veterans, and carry out public awareness campaigns. Especially this is true about female veterans with disabilities, those who reside in rural areas, remote areas, who suffer from not only societal but also economic discrimination. About stereotypes about female veterans, we have to prevent gender-based and sexual violence against them and create a preventive system which could be based on the special trainings in military universities and military educational institutions aimed at decreasing the discrimination of female officers, female military officers, and to improve the situation, keeping in mind the higher level of education among female military servants, and keeping there are many opportunities to involve these female veterans to the peer-to-peer support programs. And what else? We should understand that all those data and information could be practically used in the reintegration programs for veterans. And now about reintegration experience in general. This is comparison between the veterans and general population. How complicated was it for us to come back to the civil life, and the same opinion, the same question among general population. To general population, we asked the question, what is your opinion, whether it was difficult for the veterans to come back to civil life, and 43% believes, of general population believes that it was very difficult. 46% believes that it was somehow difficult. This is a public opinion about the contribution of the veterans to Ukrainian defense. 36% almost do not value, 9% that is almost each 10 person in society does not value their contribution in the defense at all. And here you see the question how the veterans perceive the degree of respect showed to them by general population, and up to 7% of indifferent attitude and 9% of disrespect. This is a chart about relations in families. A big percentage are somehow spoiled, considerably spoiled, and big part says that the relations in the family has not changed, and only 14% mentioned that the relations in their families even improved. The majority of veterans believe that civil population has either respect or it is at least neutral in terms of respect to them. I believe that this quotation is worth to be voiced. In one of the focus groups, we have heard the following, how the communication had changed. Out of those pro-Ukrainian supporters who were such big patriots before the war, but when it came to military and combat actions, neither of them went to the front line. Here you see the big percentage of those who experienced discrimination because of their veteran status. 51% of such people faced all sorts of discrimination from unknown people, from civil friends, from neighbors, from employers, colleagues, family members, bus drivers, 2%. This sounds not like a big deal, but if we think about bus drivers who show this experience, that's a huge figure actually. The perception and exception of veterans by civil population. 55% of general population, out of general population, I have acquaintances among war veterans. Some of them, 18% have friends, 12% neighbors, 10% family members, colleagues, and other. 45% did not know what to answer. These are recommendations which I would like to voice out. We should apply comprehensive methodologies to reintegration of veterans aimed at wide spectrum of veterans and correct wide spectrum of problems. The reintegration work should be coordinated with veteran organizations, grassroots veteran organizations, in order to be able to adjust the programs to the needs of veterans and train leaders of the veteran communities in such skills as becoming the agents of changes, to train them in human rights, societal work, etc., and to strengthen the dialogue with the social institutions of the state. For example, the Ministry of Social Affairs or Social Assistance in Ukraine, veteran organizations, and service delivery organizations, in order to fill in the gaps which result gaps in information and misunderstanding existent between different service providers. That's it. I would like to thank you once again for attending this meeting. I would like to thank to the Lawyers 100 and to the Kiev International Institute of Sociology, who made this survey such a large scale and precious tool. I would like also to thank to the survey participants, to all our war veterans who sacrificed their personal time to participate in it. At the very beginning, there was a multi-component survey, and now I encourage you to disseminate it, and you can find it on the website of IREX. This is international non-profit organization working in many countries, and this work was supported by the U.S. Department of State, but this is not the only project of IREX, and I encourage you to look at other projects of this organization. We also would like to thank to the American people who, via the U.S. Department of State, supported this very important and crucial survey for Ukraine. I would like to point out to the hard copies of our survey in 2 languages, and you can find these both versions, English and Ukrainian versions, on the IREX website. I would like to strengthen the latest statement made by Mariia about social reintegration. I would like to reiterate to the saying that behind each figure there are real people. We have to make the experience of veterans public in Ukraine. And it seems to us that all the veterans are quite well heard in society, but in reality, we found out that people do not know much about veterans, and this lack of knowledge becomes a source for false perceptions of the veterans in society. The veterans live in the context of Ukraine. They now amount to 1% of Ukrainian population, and this general population should be prepared to communicate with them. 55% of Ukrainians mentioned that they, among their acquaintances, they have veterans. But these are those people about whom they know that they are veterans. There might be a lot of more people with combating experience, and they are bearers of the experiences which may enrich civil population. Now we are ready to Q&A session. Good afternoon. I'm Mikhaila Datsenko, Ukraine American Business Council. You mentioned about ideas to cooperate with the Ministry of Digitalization related to the register of veterans. Would you please specify more about this work? And also, you mentioned that many veterans, after coming back, had changed their immediate communication circle. Could you please describe more about that? Whether they stopped to communicate with former friends or acquaintances with different positions, or what happened? Whether they feel discriminated, or what is the reason for that? I can answer both questions. I think the digital register of the war veterans is now at the stage of development, and we cooperate with the Ministry of Veterans on it. And it is part of our program aimed at strengthening capacity of the Ministry of Veterans. Quite often, the veterans and even bureaucrats believe that the register will be the platform to apply for assistance and privileges. Unfortunately, that's not true. The register will be a base for verification when the veterans would apply to the assistance. Now, your question about the change in communications. The veterans believe that the veterans perceive that civil population in general has a good perception of veterans, while the civil population in general was not that optimistic about their perception of veterans. My personal observations prove that at some stage after coming back, the veterans try to communicate with the people who may provide assistance, reintegration to prevent any negative influences on them, having changed the jobs, the emphasis in their lives, and I agree with you that conscientiously or subconsciously they start to communicate with those people who trust them more, with whom they feel more comfortable. And at this stage when they are just when they have just come back from the military service, they feel more comfortable with those who better perceive them. I fully agree with you that the emphasis was made not only on the friends of veterans, but also on the civil population in general. That is what our figures reflect. Now the next question. Good afternoon. I'm Kostyna. I'm a veteran. I have the following question. I have much to add about the reintegration of veterans, but I have the following question. In line with the international standards, reintegration comprises several stages. First is revival of the roles and status, and the second is the economic component, and the third is a social and political component, how I would call it in Ukrainian realities. Of course, the volume of your survey the scope of your survey was huge, and you presented just small part of it, but I would like to know whether you studied the involvement of veterans to the social and political lives in their communities, and what was the attitude in communities to such things. According to Razumkov Center survey, the attitude of the social trust to veterans and former combatants is rather high. Whether you had such an aspect in your survey. Before answering your question, I have to ask you about political component. What do you mean, the political affiliation, involvement into the public positions in communities? I mean, political reintegration means everything from social work in communities up to the political processes, that is involvement to political parties, participation in elections as candidates, etc. In the international standards, political integration stretches from the right to vote up to the communication with the socium in general. Thank you for this clarification. When we think about involvement into the political process, about percentages of involved veterans, we did not carry out such surveys. At the same time, we recommended to involve veterans into the social economic processes, especially the leaders of veteran organizations, formal and informal leaders of veterans. And what we did more broadly, we studied the work of veteran organizations and reflected it here. The survey was carried out in a strange time for the veteran community and for general civil population during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was based on the self-evaluation by veterans, and actually this is a big asset of this survey, that it is based on the perception and opinions of veterans and general population. We looked at the psychological support. We carried out additional survey among employers and their views of veterans. What you mentioned, these are complementary surveys that should be carried out additionally, but it should not be carried out at a general, based on the general sample of veterans. And here we should carry out a survey on both sides, and we encourage you to come to us and request such survey. And one more question. Thank you. I'm Yulia Mori. I'm head of the Lawyers 100 NGO, and I've got actually two questions. The first question was about stigmatization of the veterans, and you proved that by figures that the civic population has much prejudice about veterans. On the other hand, general population has better attitude towards veterans that the veterans expected and that the general population expected. Don't you see this as a signal that the work among veterans about their perception in society should be strengthened? And the second, I would like to ask a question about a special survey about employers. As the Lawyers 100, we have a hypothesis which I'm not sure could be proved about job guarantees to veterans, that not so many veterans that many veterans are happy with the job guarantees provided to them, but the burden of that guarantees, the commercial burden, economic burden, it falls on the employers, and this dissatisfaction of the employers with the heaviness of that burden is among the sources of prejudices against veterans among employers. Thank you for pointing out to the gap between perception of the veterans, how they are perceived in society, and the real perception of veterans in society. 64% of population have high respect to the veterans, and 22% of general population respect veterans, and this is a huge percentage together against the veterans' perception whether they are respected. How can we comment on this gap between perceptions? We have to bring this to communities together, so to say, and allow them to know more about the opposite category. As for the employers, the survey on the website suggests how the veterans are perceived by employers. We suggested positive economic incentives for employers who employ veterans, because the veterans have a set of privileges, but employers have some prejudices against veterans, which are fueled by the state guarantees to the veterans, which you are right, they should be provided actually by the employers. I would like to comment about attitudes. So one question in a survey was about the level of respect to the veterans, and the second was about stigmatization. We analyzed statistics about stigmatization. And in that question, we had the list of situations in which veterans were stigmatized. And due to that situations, the veterans got experience of stigmatization. That might be single cases which did not influence the general perception about your first question. This is a paradox. Perception of general population is as follows: the military servant and a veteran are different people. When we speak about the military servants, this creates positive picture in the general people's minds. But when you say the veterans, the picture does not appear. Some veterans perceive that they were discriminated during job search. They were veterans, and the same happened during the visits to family doctors. A huge percentage of veterans do not mention that they are war veterans when they come to the family doctors. There should be so-called cultural adaptation. Any transition from one culture to another requires familiarization with the norms of the new culture, with the behaviors in this culture, with the traditional costumes worn in this culture, and thus the civil population should know more about the military culture, that they not just go for fighting and shooting, but they gain precious experience which could be properly and beneficially used in the civil service, and thus cultural adaptation of veterans to their civil neighbors, to their civil physicians, etc., is a big part of work. And by the way, we plan to update our information on the IREX website, and I encourage you to follow up these new updates. I also would like to add to the answers to these questions. Of course, one of the ways to overcome the gap and insufficient understanding between different categories of population is to organize joint activities of these different categories. The civic organizations, both veteran and non-veteran organizations, at the local levels should establish more cooperation, more transparent, more understandable cooperation to diminish insufficient understanding and to diminish stereotypes. And your question about the negative impact of privileges in the labor market, how to overcome this problem. Partially, the fieldwork opinions were included into recommendations. The positive privileges to employers is one thing. Then strengthening competition. The tenders and public procurement bids may guarantee some privileges to the veteran organizations in public procurement. Because quite often veterans have much better hard and soft skills than civic population. I don't see any raised hands. I cannot hear you. I would comment from the side of employers. The biggest fear of the employers about veterans is about additional burden on the additional burden of the payroll tax. Because the employers are not afraid of the PSTD syndrome. The biggest fear of employers is a burden on, of the payroll tax. At the moment, when you resolve this issue with the payroll tax, excessive payroll tax to be paid for the veterans by employers and compensated from the state, then this would be resolved. That is what I mean, that due to the veterans, the employers may incur higher payroll tax expenses. This results in negative thing that the employers perceive veterans as charity employment, but not as professional and competitive employment, and do not perceive the veterans as a precious asset to their company. and quite usually there is a big gap between the CEO perceptions and HR head perceptions and the lower rank HR officers who recruit employees. Well, let us now finish our press conference. I would like to thank for this stream. We have answered to the questions in our newsroom, and we would encourage you to ask questions in via internet. We would like to thank to our partners, Veteran Hub, the Lawyers 100, and to Kyiv International Institute of Sociology. And we would like to thank hugely to our partners from IREX and to the U.S. Department of State and to the people of America in general, because this is an issue of huge importance for us. We encourage you to visit our website, and you will find a lot of information about the survey among the veterans. The statistics is quite useful, and we encourage you to